All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started here to be mindful of everybody's time. Before I jump into some of the housekeeping procedures, I wanted to unfortunately mention, I'm sure you saw the email that we sent out yesterday evening, but one of our past section and PGF America presidents, Dick Smith Sr., passed away yesterday. So if you can keep everybody, his family and friends in your thoughts and prayers, that would be much appreciated. The service information hasn't been made public yet, but once it is, we'll be sure to share that with the section professionals. So just a few housekeeping items this morning. So choose to keep your cameras on or off. If there's discussion, it's sometimes nice to have your camera on, but certainly not mandatory. While Alice is presenting, please keep your microphones on mute so there isn't any background noise. If you can't find your microphone button, it should be at the bottom of your screen. You can click that on and off. There's a button near the bottom of your screen I would like you all to avoid hitting. It's a box with a up arrow. It says present now. Please do not click that, as that will interrupt Alice's presentation. During the presentation, if everyone can remain on mute, but if you do have questions that come up, please feel free to put those into the chat and I will prompt Alice as needed. If you have any technical issues, please put those in the chat too, and I'll do my best to help you through those. Please be aware, though, that most of the time those issues stem from your own Wi-Fi or internet connections. If anyone has dialed in via telephone this morning, please send me an email at mfreypga@pjhq.com. That's mfrey@pjhq.com. We'll make sure you get your PDR credits for today. And finally, we are recording the morning session. So if you need to refer back to it, or if you want to share it with any of your colleagues that aren't able to attend, it will be available on YouTube. Should be sometime next week. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Clark Lewis to get us started with a little song. Clark?
Okay. And I'll dedicate this to my good friend, Dick Smith, who was in no small way responsible for helping me get on this wonderful rules committee. So it's for you, Dick, and for America. As the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us pledge allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Very nice, Clark. Thank you very much. So let me turn it over to Miss Alice Miller. If you're not familiar with Alice, she does a lot of great work for our section, our rules committee, and she's actually a major champion. So that's such a cool thing to have on your resume. So Alice, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Matt, and thank you, Clarky. What a great way to start the day. Let me go ahead and get this up. Okay, so the presentation today is called Are You Rules Ready for 2023? And we have had some changes. This has been a revision year, so we do have some fairly significant changes to the rules. And this is going to be a two-part presentation. The first part, I'm going to go over try to highlight and go through the rules that I think are the most significant changes. Some of them are nuanced, but most of them are pretty significant. And then the second part, we're going to go through talking about what could we do at the club level to ensure that our members and customers and our staff, that we're ready for the 2023 season from a rules perspective. So I have to give a shout out to Mr. Tom Karpus. This was his presentation. When you see these blue slides, the slides I'm going to go into next were provided by the USGA, and they're actually from the decks that we use at the national rules workshops. Lots of slides to choose from. I tried to go through and pick what I thought was most relevant, and I'll try to fill in some context as we go. But as Clarky and some of you know, those rules decks are kind of like drinking from a fire hose. But anyway, we'll do our best. So the way I thought I would start is just put your mind at ease. The changes for 2023, in many cases, the wording is going to look very familiar to you. If you're familiar with the 2019 and the different clarifications that came out, because what they've done in 2023, yes, there are some new rules. We're going to start out with Rule 25, which is the only new rule, but it is brand new. They added a rule to the rule book. But in most cases, you're going to see things where maybe the rules have incorporated, been amended to incorporate, whether it's a model local rule that was in wide use, maybe some kind of a clarification that came out that was in wide use. So clarifications actually were part of the rules last year. And we did have a pretty thick stack by the end of 4 years of the clarifications. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but they are still doing that quarterly for this year. So let's go ahead and get started in the new rules. And I'm going to go through them in order, but for the most part, but I did want to start with Rule 25. It's a brand new rule. It's modifications for players with disabilities. For those of you that have run events and used the committee procedures to make modifications for players, this will look very familiar. What they've done is they've taken a lot of that information that was already being used, but instead of having to adopt it as a local rule for each event, now we have Rule 25, brand new rule. There's a little bit of an overview of it. We're going to look at mostly just, I'm not going to go through this whole rule, but we're going to look at the purpose statement and a little bit of an overview. And you can already see that we have 4 categories here of disability. So the whole purpose of the rule is to provide modifications to the rest of the rules that allow players with certain disabilities to compete with players who have no disability, or maybe they have the same or something totally different. And you can see from our little categories down here, these are the 4 categories we're going to look at. But the thing about Rule 25 now, it applies to all competitions. And there's nothing you have to adopt to say that a player with a disability can play in an event. Rule 25 is there for all forms of play in all competitions. And the important thing to note is it's the player's category of disability and their eligibility to use this rule. And that is, there's more information on that in the committee procedures. And just to point out the 4 categories that we have, players that are blind, players that are amputees, players that need some kind of assistive mobility device, and players with intellectual disabilities. So these are the 4 categories. Just went over, you could see from those pictures. And the blindness, it includes certain levels of vision impairment. Doesn't necessarily mean totally blind. Amputees could also be someone with a limb deficiency. Again, the mobility devices and intellectual disabilities. Now, the rules recognize that there are many other players with other types of disabilities, and here's a little short list of some possible ones, but these additional categories are not covered in Rule 25. As of now, the rules of golf don't think that there's been any requirement identified that has a need to modify the rules for these players. So it's only those 4 categories. The equipment rules are going to apply in most cases without modification, although there is a section in the equipment rules, Section 7, that will tell you what modifications are allowed for players with specific disabilities. And if you haven't looked at the equipment rules, if you need some good reading material, you can get this on the USGA website, and it makes my head spin. So I try not to deal with the equipment rules until I have to. As I mentioned earlier, to get more information to see and guidance on how to really use Rule 25, who's eligible, that sort of thing. If you're running a competition that has players with disabilities that are competing in it, there's really good help here in the committee procedures in section 5D, and I would really encourage you to look at that. All right, now we are going to go back to the front of the rule book and just kind of go through the rules in order. And again, just a disclaimer up front, this is not an all-inclusive list. I know I had put together a list for myself just to help me in studying to teach this year, and it's a 2-pager. There's Mike Raby put together something that's almost like an academic dissertation to help all of us on the national committee that are teaching. And he goes through almost like point by point. If there's almost a punctuation change, Mike points it out. Not quite that bad, but he did a very thorough analysis, and it's many, many pages. That's not what we're going to do today. I'm just going to go through the rules, try to point out what I think are the most significant changes that could impact you as an administrator. If you're, we are the committee at our club in most cases. The head pro or somebody on the staff is the committee, and our members and guests expect us to know what's going on, and we want to help educate them anyway. And so I'm trying to pick out the ones that I think people will use either as a player or an administrator, and then you can do further. We'll have information on how you can get further education on your own. All right, starting in Rule 1. 1.3C4, we affectionately used to call this, or I still call it, the volume discount penalty statement. 1.3 is all about penalties, and we have situations where you have a player has multiple breaches of a penalty. They might break the same rule multiple times. They might break different rules, especially our newer players. My high school team's a perfect example. They break rules all the time, not knowing they even broke a rule. But anyway, this rule helps tell us how many penalty strokes is the player actually going to get. This has had a real facelift since 2019. It's really been streamlined, and it makes it easier to, I think, much more straightforward to apply this rule and to figure out how many strokes is the player going to get. And I think part of the philosophy behind it from the USGA perspective is like, you've got a player that's not very knowledgeable and they do multiple things wrong. 2 strokes is probably enough in most cases. So, and also for us as committee members to try to, interpret this rule and apply it, it's really been streamlined. So we no longer, for those of you that had the old knowledge, we no longer have to consider whether the acts or actions of the player are related or unrelated. That's out the window. That in itself makes this rule a lot more straightforward. So now, the only thing we have to consider is what did the player do? And was there an intervening event? Okay. We have a new internal definition of intervening event. This too has been streamlined. And so for the purpose of applying this rule, there are only 2 intervening events. One, the completion of a stroke. That's very obvious, and that's always been the case. And number 2 is awareness. And that was always the case also, but we've gotten rid of putting a ball in play. We've gotten rid of the related, unrelated stuff. So what we have to look at is not just look at what did the player do, and did they make a stroke, or were they aware they did something wrong? The awareness part has been expanded a little bit. I mean, at least this was new to me. So it's not just knowing that you did something wrong, but awareness includes when they're told of a breach. Before, I just thought, well, either I knew it, in which case I was cheating, or somebody told me. Clarky said, hey, Alice, you can't do that. If I'm taking practice swings in a bunker, we'll use that as our example. So I'm taking my practice swings in the bunker and splashing the sand, and I'm just kind of clueless. I can do that multiple times, and until somebody tells me I can't, I'm only going to get a single penalty for doing that. But if Clarky says something to me or somebody I'm playing with, but now they've added this, if the player is uncertain, if I have doubt in my mind, I wonder if I should or shouldn't be doing that. That, to me, adds a little nuance here, but that's really getting into the weeds. And as a rules official, you'd really have to question a player. But for our purposes and for your purposes at your facilities, what happened? Was there an intervening event? Did the player make a stroke, or did someone tell them that, hey, you can't do that? So we're going to get a single penalty, no matter how many rules I break, or if I do the same one multiple times, as long as there hasn't been that intervening event. I haven't made a stroke. I'm clueless. I don't know that I've done anything wrong, and nobody's told me I've done anything wrong. I can do multiple things wrong, between those intervening events, I'm going to get a single penalty. And if the rules that I've broken have different levels of penalty, I'm going to get the higher level penalty. So maybe I've done a little procedural error that would be a one stroker, but I've done something that's a general penalty. I'm only going to get 1 + 2 is going to equal 2. Obviously in match play, once you get the general penalty, you're headed to the next tee. Multiple penalties apply if you breach, could be the same rule or a different rule after an intervening event. As soon as you have the intervening event, which again, only 2 things, I've made a stroke, now the slate's clean and the clock starts over, or someone tells me, hey, Alice, you can't do that. And if I say, oh no, I'm sure I can, Clarky, and I go ahead and I keep splashing sand out of the bunker with my practice swings, and now I am going to get multiple penalties. We have this exception at the end. This has been there before, but I like that they put this in. And this is just a kind of little public service announcement for you all, just to remember that if we fail to replace a moved ball, it's always going to be just the general penalty. We're not going to try to decide, oh, okay, I moved my ball, I failed to replace it. Was I aware that I was supposed to? I'm not going to have to figure any of that out. This is a pretty common thing that happens. I mean, think about it at our clubs. I've had members come in and they, I was out there and I went to dress my ball in the rough and I bumped it with my club and it moved forward an inch and I wasn't sure if I should replace it or not. I know I got a penalty for moving it, but then I thought to myself, well, it's no different than if I made a stroke at it. So I just added 1 to my score. Is that right? And unfortunately, that's not right, because making a stroke and accidentally moving your ball are 2 different things. But in any case, the player in that situation is never going to get multiple penalties. They're always just failing to replace a moved ball is always going to be just the general penalty for playing from a wrong place under 14.7. And this is another little public service announcement. Just a reminder, this isn't new, but when I teach this rule, I just like to remind folks, especially those that are not as familiar with the rules, that you can get all wrapped up in reading 1.3C4 and think, oh, I get this volume discount. No. Any penalty strokes that you've earned for taking penalty relief are always going to count in your score. They're not going to get discounted in any way, shape, or form. Always going to apply those. Okay, moving on to Rule 3, the competition. The changes we have here are all to do with stroke play and all to do with scoring. And I don't know, you could consider them significant or not. I guess it depends on who you're dealing with. But we know, this is just a little slide to remind us of, that the player, has to check the hole by hole. So they have to make sure there's a score in every box, and they have to have 2 signatures on the card, certifying. We call it certifying. I'm going to say signing the card for the purpose of our discussion. And the change that has happened here, and it seems it's fairly minor, but it's all to do with the marker. And it's when a player has had multiple markers. Sometimes one player gets sick, can't complete the round. They give the card to the other player to keep, the score. And previously, that player had to sign off and certify the scores that they were the marker for. And now what the rule is telling us, that if the other person, the other player in the group who might now be the marker, if the person who ends up being the marker, if they saw the player play all the holes, you don't have to have these 2 signatures on the card. That's all that means. And I think it's a nice change, because you wouldn't want a player, getting disqualified for what's basically an administrative mistake when, their marker gets sick and has to leave the course for whatever reason. So small change, but good to know from an administrative standpoint. Again, just kind of a little reminder, that player has all these responsibilities, can't change the whole score, got to make sure they're certified, return it to the committee. And if we don't, we know that the player is disqualified. There's nothing new here. But I wanted to bring this slide up because I want to point out a new model local rule that we have. It's model local rule L1, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the second part of the presentation. But I would strongly encourage you, when you're running your events at your club, to use this model local rule. And what it does, it doesn't let the player off the hook if they have the wrong score in the box, or if they're missing a score in the box. But what it does do is it reduces the disqualification penalty down to 2 strokes if there's failure to sign the scorecard. If either the marker didn't sign it, the player didn't sign it, or if neither one of them signed it, with this model local rule in place, that player can still keep playing. They're just going to add 2 strokes to the last hole. And the LPGA Tour has it on their hard card. PGA Tour, USGA, I think, is going to use it. I'm not sure about you. We're going to put it in our section hard card for 2023. And it just, it seems like a more reasonable penalty. I can't tell you how many times a player gets excited in the scoring area. At the club level, they just throw the card across the desk and walk away, and you have to chase them down to get the signature. But this really, I think, helps us as administrators, and it still is a strong incentive for the players to make sure those 2 signatures are there. But anyway, so that's just, I put this up to just introduce this model local rule that's going to be in wide use. Now here's a good one, nice change and good for all of us to know as administrators at our clubs. There's no longer a requirement for the player to ensure that their handicap is shown on the card and that it's accurate. This was a big deal before. And this change makes sense because now that we have all the, the scoring software and everything, it keeps all the handicap up to date. Now it's going to be that the committee's responsibility to calculate the handicap, apply the handicap. They always were responsible for applying it, but it takes the responsibility for ensuring that a correct handicap is on the scorecard. It takes that responsibility and shifts it from the player to the committee. And I think that's a real good change. So we always knew that the committee was responsible for the math. Now they're also responsible for ensuring that the player's handicap is on there and calculating the net score. Equipment rules. Okay, rule 4. A few little changes here, and these should make sense. See if this will play. I've got a nice video here that I'm hoping will play. You guys let me know if you can't hear it.
The rules of golf changed in 2023, and they've become much friendlier in situations like these. So what can you do if you damage a club during the round? You can try to repair it if that's even possible, and you can still use it because it'll be treated as conforming for the rest of that round. But the big change in 2023 is that you'll be able to replace it. And here's the thing, damage doesn't just mean the extreme example of snapping a club in 2 pieces. The term damage actually has a really broad application because it simply means any change to the club. In other words, if you played a shot from the cart path and scuffed up the sole of your wedge, those scuff marks will be a change to the club, and that would make it eligible for replacement. There is an exception for abuse though. If you damage your club out of abuse, you're not going to find much sympathy from the rules. You can still use that club for the rest of the round, but you won't be allowed to repair it or replace it. And finally, be aware that there is a local rule that can limit club replacement to only certain types of damage. That'll most commonly be used at elite level competitions, but it's always a good idea to check the local rules before you play.
I hope was everybody able to hear that video? Okay.
Yeah, it came through great.
Okay, good. I think that really captures, and Jay Roberts is great. He's very entertaining, and the big change about equipment for 2023. Now the next one, and this came out of a situation that happened on the tour. We know that you can't, change the adjustment on a club or do anything. Once you've started play with it, whatever your adjustable driver is set to, you need to leave that setting there. And if you do change it, as long as, and I had one of my high school kids do this, it was during a practice round, thankfully, he thought he could just change it as he went around. And I said, no, if you do that in competition and you make a stroke with it, you're going to be disqualified. So you change the adjustment, change it back. Well, they had a little loophole when it came to these metallic stickers, impact tape on the face of the club. And the situation that happened was actually with these little metallic stickers that you use with a launch monitor. And so in 2019, previous to 2023, in this rule change, if you inadvertently started the round and you had left a couple of these stickers on your club face, you could not use that club during that round. And if you removed the stickers and used the club, or you just went ahead and used the club, you were going to have a disqualification penalty, which very harsh for what seems like a pretty small infraction. So they've added this to Rule 4.1 to say that any external attachment, and they're using, because this is the most likely one to happen, a sticker on the face, you can remove that. You have to remove it before you use the club during the round. But if you start the round and you forgot to take your little reflective stickers or your impact tape off in front of your iron or wedge, you can still use that club as long as you remove that. Okay, that's a a pretty significant change that came about because of a player, I believe on the PGA Tour, getting DQ'd. I think it might have been DeChambeau. All right, restrictions from adding or replacing clubs. So the change here is the one down here at the bottom, the bullet point at the bottom. In 2019, you weren't allowed to build a club from parts that were being carried for you, but you could use parts that were being carried for someone else on the course. And so they've kind of closed that loophole to be consistent with borrowing a club from other players. And so now you can't build a club from parts being carried by anyone, for anyone. If you're going to repair a club, you have to get the parts either from the golf shop or your locker, or in case of a bigger tournament, the manufacturer's truck. So that just kind of closed a little loophole, made it more consistent with not being able to borrow from any other player on the course. Okay, playing a hole. This is a nice change. In 6.3, talks about the ball that you use in playing a hole, and we're normally expected to try to hole out with the same ball that we played from the teeing area. And as a matter of fact, the rule starts out saying that you must do that, but we do have some exceptions. Obviously, if our ball's lost or out of bounds, we have to substitute a ball. And there's situations where we're allowed to substitute. Here in the upper right, you can see that the player's taking relief from a penalty area. Anytime you're taking relief, whether it's free relief or penalty relief, you can always substitute a ball, just a little sidebar there. But the picture down below, here we have Johnny on the putting green, and he's substituting his lucky putting ball for his original ball. This is not allowed. Now, he can correct that mistake, but if he doesn't, if he goes on and makes a stroke, he's going to be in a penalty situation. The big change for 2023, which I think is a great change, is this was a general penalty in 2019. But now, if Johnny goes ahead and makes a stroke with his lucky putting ball, it's just a one-stroke penalty. It's like a procedural penalty now, and it's a one-shotter, and you just keep playing out the hole with the same ball. I like the change number one because I think the penalty is more in line with the crime, if you will, but also I think hopefully it'll help people understand that the difference. Like if you substitute a ball, whether you're allowed to or not, you can score with that ball. That ball is in play. It is never going to be a wrong ball. And that's where I think our players at the club level get confused. If Johnny goes ahead and hits this ball and then somebody else in the group goes, oh, you weren't allowed to do that. That's not your ball. That's a wrong ball. No. He substituted that ball. He put it down with the intent for it to be in play. Anytime a player does that substituted ball can be scored with. Now, doesn't mean he couldn't correct the mistake as long as he hasn't hit a putt. That's a whole nother rule, but that we'll probably hopefully talk about another day. But nice change, taking this from a general penalty down to a one-stroke penalty if you play an incorrectly substituted ball. Again, I consider this more of a procedural mistake, and the penalty of one stroke is much more appropriate. This is a little bit of just a nuanced change in stroke play, order of play. In 2019, and the difference here is the players actually have to act on this agreement to be in a penalty situation. So in 2019, if the players just agreed to play out a turn, they automatically each got 2 strokes. And if they knew the agreement wasn't allowed, they got disqualified. And so now in 2023, they may agree to play out a turn, but until one of them makes a stroke, they can back out of the agreement. So in this situation, the player on the left, maybe she's not playing that well, and she wants to help out her friend who's, in contention. And she's like, oh, let me go ahead and play first so you can see what my ball does. Or let me go ahead and play first, kind of wink, wink, implying so that you can see what my ball does. Well, as soon as she hits that ball, they're both going to get 2 shots. But she has to take the action and actually make a stroke first. Playing out turn. This is much different than playing ready golf. This is a whole different animal than playing ready golf. We encourage ready golf. We like ready golf. But in this case, they're doing it with an agreement in order to help the other player. Now, again, the disqualification penalty is still on the table. If they knew that they were not allowed to make that agreement, they're still going to get disqualified. So there's no change there. The change is for 2023, one of them has to actually play out of turn, and then they get the 2-stroker. All right, ball at rest. This is probably my favorite change for 2023. Got a great video that shows it better than I can describe it. But this is a new exception under 9.3. Rule 9 is all about, what happens if your ball at rest gets moved. And 9.3 is the section that deals with your ball being moved by natural forces. And this exception 2 is brand new, and it talks about, what we're going to be able to do going forward if we've taken a drop and our ball ends up moving because of wind or gravity or whatever. Let's take a look.
One of the rules changes for 2023 is a new exception when your ball is moved by natural forces. Given that golf is played outside, the effects of nature, like wind, water, and gravity, can sometimes cause your ball to move. And for the most part, when these natural forces move your ball, there is no penalty, and you'll just play the ball from wherever it comes to rest. But sometimes that can be just a little too harsh. Imagine taking relief from a penalty area. You've dropped the ball, it's at rest, and while you're preparing for your next stroke, a gust of wind blows it back into the water in the penalty area. Since you can't play it as it lies, your only option is to take relief again for another penalty stroke. And that's just not really consistent with the purpose of the rule. So in 2023, that's no longer the case. Under the new exception, if the ball is at rest after you've dropped, placed, or replaced it, and natural forces move it to a different area of the course or out of bounds, then you must replace it on its original spot. So in the case of the ball rolling back into the penalty area, there is no need to take penalty relief. The ball was at rest after a drop, and natural forces moved it from one area of the course, the general area, to a different area of the course, a penalty area. Therefore, you would simply replace a ball on its original spot and play on. The key here is changing areas of the course. If that same ball was moved by natural forces to a different spot in the same area of the course, then you'll just play it as it lies from its new spot. Another situation where this exception can come into play is if natural forces move your ball from the general area into a bunker. Say your ball is embedded just above a bunker. You take your free relief by dropping twice, but end up having to place it. The ball's at rest, and while preparing for your next stroke, wind or gravity cause it to move into the bunker. Simply replace it without penalty and play on. Do be aware, though, that replacing is a requirement under this exception. If you've taken relief for preferred lies on the fringe, for example, and natural forces move it onto the putting green, this is a desirable outcome, but you are required to put the ball back on its original spot.
Okay, I think, like I said, as a rules official, I've had situations in the past where both those things happened. Player took their drop from a penalty area. It was windy day, kind of a steep slope. We had to end up placing the ball to get it to come to rest. And while they were surveying their shot, it went back in the penalty area. And then you get called back to the same ruling that you just had. And they go, what do I do now? And it's like, you had to just kind of go, well, unfortunately, you've got to take penalty relief again. That seemed like not a very fair outcome. I think it was it Roy McIlroy, somebody at one of the events last year, it happened to, and everybody's seen it. I've had it happen with a player taking the embedded ball relief on the bank above a bunker. That fortunately was a college event, so there were no pros to yell at us, but this is a great change. It just makes so much sense. You've already taken your relief, and whether it's free relief or penalty relief, that ball now owns that area of the course. It doesn't necessarily own the spot, as he showed in the video, unlike the putting green, where on the putting green it owns the spot after you've marked it, lifted it, and replaced it. But at least it owns the area of the course. It's not going to change. It might change position, like it showed at the end of the video, but you're going to at least be in the same area of the course. Great change for 2023. All right, Rule 10. This has had quite a bit of revisions, amendments, whatever you want to call it, just incorporating things that were either clarifications last year. But it's been a pretty big rewrite, but I think this stuff will be pretty familiar. We got a couple changes. One is in this bullet point, and then these bullet points about setting down an object and the restricted area for the caddy. So there's no change here in the sense of if in 2019, a ball played from the putting green, you couldn't set something down to help with the line of play. Like you couldn't set the water bottle, and then even if the bottle was off the green and say, okay, Arnie, aim at the bottle. That has not changed. That is still the same. But what is different for 2023 is that this prohibition of setting an object down to provide help with line of play or aiming or whatever, that applies to every area on the golf course now. It used to be until this year in 2019, for instance, if you had a blind shot over a hill, your caddy could walk up and maybe set the bag there, and as long as he moved the bag before you hit, he could set the bag there and then walk away and get the yardage or do whatever. just can't set stuff down on the golf course anywhere. So that makes it more consistent with what it was for the putting green. You can hang on to the stuff, and caddy can stand there with the bag on his shoulder and then move out of the way before the player hits, but you can't set anything down to help you line up. And even though this is a different bullet point, it's kind of in the same concept. You can't set anything down to help you take your stance or make your stroke. You can't lay the club on the ground anymore. We have a little internal definition for setting an object down. It means it's on the ground, in contact with the ground rather, and the player's not touching it. Okay, that's a no-no. And again, can't avoid penalty just by removing the object, which you used to be able to do that. You're on the hook once you've done it. A little addition to the rule, just again, closing all the loopholes. It's going to also apply if you do something like this guy's drawing a little line in the dew to help, give him a, line to swing along. That's a no-no. Those are all going to be general penalties.
I have a question real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
With that 10.2 advice, now this is probably like going way past, we have certain maybe members that may align their golf bag with their legs, aiming towards their target and using that as a alignment aid, or a cart parked really close to the ball, aiming it towards where they need. Would that be considered other help?
That is a great question. I think it would be. I think if they're doing it to help with aiming, or taking their stance, or aiming their, helping them have a path they want to swing on, I think that would be a violation of this rule. But I would defer to my other committee members to see what they think on that.
Okay, how would I prove that?
Well, there's the question. When these things come up at any level of play, you kind of have to try to find out what's the player's intent. Like, hey, why are you doing that? If they say, oh, I'm doing this to help me line up because, I have real alignment issues, then you can, kind of politely say, well, the rules don't allow that, and you need to stop doing that.
So would that be a warning first, then a general penalty next?
Oh, definitely at the club level. Absolutely. In a tournament situation.
You shut off.
Hey, Alice, you accidentally muted yourself.
My mouse the wrong
There
way.
you go.
Okay. Whoops. All right. Let me get back to where I want to be. Okay, give me a second, you guys. This is where I am. All right, hang on. Slideshow. Okay, Matt, I lost my slideshow control. Do I need to back out and start over?
No, Alice, we can still see your screen. It's just not in the presentation mode. So if
Right.
you can go into the PowerPoint application. Do you see your menu bar?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
back to business. I'm a little techie. I'm not very techie, as you guys can see. But anyway, great question. Again, I would be very diplomatic about how I approach a member, and I do it in just an informational, educational way, because it's not like you don't want it to be a gotcha situation. You want them to, just be informed. Self-standing putters. So the rules came out. We've got a clarification here for 2023 that you're not able to use these self-standing putters like this. But not long after that came out, we went right to a new clarification, and we do have some clarifications that have already been published. And this is one of them. This is going to delay the implementation of this for 2 years. This will not go into effect until 2025. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if the players that use self-standing putters put up a protest, or the companies that make them. But even when this does go into effect in 2025, as long as the player is still standing here touching the putter and goes behind it, it's fine. But they are going to start limiting in this in 2025. All right. There's nothing in this next part that's going to be probably new to you, because what they've done is they've incorporated all of those clarifications that came out in fairly early in 2019 about the caddy standing behind to help the player line up. And it's just been rewritten into the rule itself, and we'll go over it. And it does have a couple new nuances, but I think it's simpler, it's more clear, it makes more sense. So we know that the caddy cannot stand behind to help the player line up once the player starts to take their stance. Taking the stance means just 1 foot in position. The player starts to step in to take the stance. Caddy is not allowed to be in that area. They've got a new name for this area. They're calling it the restricted area, and it's on or close to an extension of the line of play behind the ball. What is not restricted is beyond the flag over here on this other side of the green, but that's a rules question. That's not anything you really need to know. So the caddy is not allowed to stand here while the player's making the stroke. Nothing new about that. It's just written in a little bit more clear language. And also we've got this definition now of what the restricted area is. So there's two things. Aiming, we know, is prohibited. Again, putting in clarifications from 2019, as long as the player, if this is the case and the caddy's there, as long as the player backs away and starts over and the caddy moves away before the player starts to make a stroke, there's no problem. That was right from one of the clarifications of 2019. And then we have help that's other than aiming. So if this, I think this is a great to have this in the rule, because if the caddy is doing something specific other than helping the player aim, and the situation we have here, the example is that maybe the caddy standing back there to see, is the player's club going to hit a nearby tree during the backswing. That's okay. They can do that, but then they have to move away before the stroke is made, and they can't use that as a loophole every time as part of a regular routine. But they are allowed to be back in that restricted area to help the player other than aiming, as long as they move away. And here, this again, common sense, this came out in the clarifications, because this happened, I think, right off the bat at the tour level in 2019. Here we have a caddy that's not paying any attention, either on, writing something in the yardage book, maybe looking at the phone, but just totally unaware that they're in that restricted area. And there's got to be no penalty for that. This is new in the rule this year. And again, common sense. I don't know if it even was in a clarification, but you can have, as a player, you can get help from somebody else other than your caddy to stand back. Like my caddy can't stand here, but I could ask another player or another player's caddy, someone to stand here to help track the flight of the ball. Because I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I'm not standing back there on the line to watch somebody hit, if the light conditions and the sky conditions are right and my aging eyes, I can't follow the ball unless I am behind there. So a player can ask someone to do that as long as it's not their caddy. And we do have restrictions on partners and also on the advice giver and team competition. They're restricted in the same way the caddy is. And we'll touch on that again, because there's a couple little things in 22 and 23 that I think I have in this presentation about that. But essentially the partner or an advice giver and team competition is limited, restricted the same way a caddy is. Can't be in that restricted area. Here's a nice reference to our new Rule 25, and pretty obvious, but there are going to be modifications for players who are blind. Their aide or their caddy can be in the restricted area because they have to be. I mean, that's the blind player relies on that person to help them aim, and that's perfectly fine. All right, Rule 11. So Rule 11 deals with balls that are in motion, and 11.1 is for accidental stuff. 11.2, it goes in, we have accidental and deliberate. So we're dealing with accidental deflections right here. And this part hasn't changed, okay? If we're on the putting green, if we're playing a ball from the putting green and it hits any one of these things, it hits another person, it hits an animal, It hits a movable obstruction. I think these are some golf clubs laying off to the side. These are going to be situations where the stroke has to be replayed. And that part has not changed. What has changed is the penalty statement. And this is it's a good change. I don't think this, in my experience, I've never been caught in a situation that was a disqualification, but it was the potential was there. So we know that just like before, if the player replays the stroke from the wrong place, they get the general penalty under 14.7. That hasn't changed. But this part of the penalty statement has changed. Like if this player had hit the ball and it deflected off of his foot, and instead of replaying the stroke, he goes ahead, he doesn't realize that he has to, and he goes ahead and he finishes out from here, and he goes and he tees off on the next hole. He's fine. He's going to get the general penalty for not replaying the stroke, but he's not going to have played from a wrong place. And that not playing from a wrong place is a game changer in terms of taking the potential disqualification out of the equation. So kind of a nuanced change. When you read the language, it wouldn't maybe occur to you at first, but it's no longer considered playing from a wrong place if you don't replay the stroke and you go ahead and finish out. Now, this next part, this comes right from, I think it was, I'm going to say it was Model Local Rule D7 last year. This came out because of what happened on the tours. The first part of Rule 11.1 says that if a ball hits, the player from the putting green, a stroke from the putting green, if it hits the player or a person attending the flag stick or the equipment, it gets replayed. Well, this Model Local Rule, it is now part of the rule, is an exception to the replay exception. And it kind of makes sense. This actually happened, I think, on the Champions Tour, where a player hit a putt and it spun out and came back and hit his foot. And the way the rule read, without the Model Local Rule in place, guess what? That player would get to hit that again with no penalty, play that stroke over. And obviously the rules don't want that. They're not trying to reward the guy that's the bad putter. So D7, the next 3 points came directly from Model Local Rule. I think it was D7. So if you're playing a ball from the putting green and it hits the player, that stroke's going to count. If it comes back, wings out and a big 360 and hits the club used to make the stroke counts. You just go ahead and keep playing. There's no penalty, but you keep playing. Remember, this is accidental. Or if it hits an animal that's been defined as a loose impediment, that could be an insect or a worm, something like that, the stroke is going to count and you play the ball as it lies. This happened on the European Tour, and without the Model Local Rule in place, this could have potentially been a big penalty problem. I'll see if you can watch this. I know the picture's small. There's a little bug right here where the arrow's pointing. Let's go ahead and play this video. Player hits the putt. The little bug's moving across. Ball goes in the hole, and the little bug just keeps going on its way. Without the Model Local Rule in place, and when this happened, then there was a video with the official questioning the player. If the player knew that he had hit the bug at the time, you would have to replay that stroke. And if you didn't, you were going to, and then you went and teed off on the next hole, he was going to be in a disqualification situation. So just a common sense thing. If you can move it, if it's an animal that's defined as a loose impediment, something you can easily pick up and move, if you choose to leave it there and you hit it, you're not going to get a free replay out of that. So in those 3 situations, the stroke counts, play it as it lies. Directly from the Model Local Rule of 2019. All right, Rule 14. Biggest change, biggest change in Rule 14, but I think one of the bigger changes is simplifying this back on the line relief procedure. I really like this. I had got my mind all wrapped around the new relief procedures in 2019, and when they had some issues with back on the line relief and they came out with the Model Local Rule, I thought, oh gosh, we should have just, stuck with the original rule. But this does actually simplify things. So if you're I'm going to start off by going through the little bit of definition here of what back on the line relief looks like, because it's got some good pictures, and talk about it a little bit. But there is a key point here to be aware of. So the player must, I should have highlighted this, the player must drop on the line. that's the one key place where players could get in trouble. You can't, now you're going to use your best judgment. You know, you're doing the best you can to drop the ball on that line. You're okay as long as you're trying to drop on the line. If you purposely drop away from the line for whatever reason, now you've got a penalty situation. But we're going to assume that the players trying to drop on the line must drop on the line to the best of their ability. And then the spot, and this is the difference from other relief areas, that spot where the ball first hits the ground, that creates the relief area. Other relief rules, we have a reference point and we take our appropriate number of club lengths for our relief. But with back on the line now, there is no reference point until you drop the ball. Where the ball hits on the ground, that creates a 1 club length, nice 1 club length radius all around. And that is your relief area, okay? Along with that, a little nuance here, when you're required to drop again, in this case, the example here, the players dropped properly in the relief area and the ball rolled outside the relief area. Guess what? This player can change where they're going to drop it on that line. They can choose to, they have to still take back on the line relief. They can't change the relief option, but they can go anywhere on that line for their second drop. And then that creates a new relief area. And they could even, I don't know why you could go in a different area of the course if you chose to. So if you do have to drop a second time with this new back on the line relief, you don't have to try to drop it on the same spot that you did the first time. You can move back and forth. Again, the relief area is created once the ball hits the ground. It's from the spot where the ball hits the ground. All of that information that's in the definition is reflected right here in the rule. And again, we have a number of rules that use back on the line relief, and ball must be dropped on the line in the location allowed by the rule, and the spot on which the ball drop creates the relief area, just almost word for word with what was in the definition. So you want to be very familiar with this. And probably the thing, if you're a tournament player, to know is like, okay, my ball rolled outside the relief area. I can go anywhere on that line, backward or forward, and create a new relief area, but that is going to be my second drop. If the ball rolls out of the relief area again, now I'm going to place it where it first struck the ground. Okay. This is a clarification for the definition of relief area. And again, just kind of telling you when the ball is and is not in the relief area. And this also applies to drop zones. So it's kind of a nice thing to know. Because there's no reference point, any part of the ball that touches or overhangs the relief area is considered in the relief area, even if it's near the hole in the front edge of the relief area. So this is a little bit different than, it's kind of a nuance, but when you're taking relief with other relief areas that use a reference point, none of the ball can be ahead of that point. And with this, you could have, just like a drop zone, you have a nice white circle. If part of the ball is hanging out over the front of that circle, as long as part of it's touching the relief area, it's in the relief area. Nuance change, and I don't think any of us would have any problem with this from an officiating standpoint. Okay, abnormal course conditions. In Rule 16, we're just going to look at embedded ball. There's been a nice change here. Again, something that doesn't happen very often. We'll just start out. This slide just shows our embedded ball relief, just as a reminder, refresher for everyone. Embedded balls are only in the general area, and it has to be a ball that embeds in its own pitch mark, right? And the reference point is always the spot right behind the ball. And then you get your 1 club length relief area. And this is fine in most situations, but there are potential situations, and, when the rules came out, different committee members, and people not on the committee came up with the idea like, well, what if your ball's embedded in the lip of a bunker? And depending on the configuration of that bunker, it was theoretically possible that you would not have a reference point, because the reference point has to be in the general area. And if the ball's embedded in the lip of the bunker, there is no spot right behind the ball or even anywhere near the ball that's not closer to the hole. So this is a good change. Let's start by watching this video of Tiger hitting this shot. It doesn't exactly illustrate this point. I did not see any instances. I saw bunkers that could have caused that to happen where you didn't have a spot to relief. I think one or two officials I talked to actually dealt with that, but this wouldn't happen often, but we can deal with it now. Let's watch Tiger.
Here's Woods, the bunker at the face, Andy.
Somewhere in here.
Bringing a rules official in here.
So Tiger's ball has embedded, not quite in the lip, fortunately for him, since this was before, this was the PGA
Figure out
Championship
where it was.
before 2023. He would be better off this year.
Can't get any worse at this point.
Can't get any worse. Oh, it could, but. Now see where Tiger puts his tee. That's not the right spot. And the official is showing him where that needs to be. I think that's Ben.
Tom Clark's PGA of America. Tom, it's pretty straightforward rule, right, for a embedded ball.
Yes, it is, Scott. I mean, basically, the earthen lip of the above the sand is part of the general area. So therefore, when the ball's embedded, find the reference point directly behind where the ball's embedded, measure within a club length, drop it, and Ben Shade, our guest from the USGA, one of our officials, took good care of Tiger and back in play.
So that was our own Tom Karpus there that was doing the TV commentary for that ruling. So now we've got this new clarification that for 2023. So when the spot immediately behind the ball is not in the general area, like let's say this is the only spot. In Tiger's case, it wasn't because his line of play was a little bit different. But if it were, the player gets to find the nearest spot in the general area, not near the hole, and this becomes the reference point. And it's normally very close to the spot where the ball is embedded, but it could be some distance away. And there's some examples here, depending on whether it might be just outside of a penalty area, up in the face of a bunker. So now you might end up going behind. You might end up going quite a ways out to the right or the left. And before you had to be within one club length, and now you don't. We're going to find a place on the golf course, no closer to the hole, for you to be able to take relief for that situation. Good change, very good change. All right, a couple little changes here in foursomes and four ball. They each have a new little subsection, and it goes back to what we talked about in Rule 10. So in foursomes, the restriction on the partner is the same as it was for the caddy. But then we also have a new subsection here. 22.6 is actually a brand new subsection. This player is not allowed to stand in the restricted area while the partner's making the stroke in order to gain information for their next stroke, which would most likely, it's going to be his. So just an additional restriction on the player to not be in the restricted area in foursomes play. And the same thing is in four ball. This is Rule 23, and it's a new subsection, 23.8. Player can't stand in that restricted area while their partner's making a stroke to gain information for their next stroke. Penalty is the general penalty. And we do have an interesting clarification. We know he can't stand back here to help this partner line up, and he can't stand back here to help judge his next stroke. But the clarification says who gets the penalty? Well, the player gets the penalty unless he was helping his partner aim in addition to helping himself, in which case they could both be penalized. Or if there was no intent to do anything, if you just happen to be standing there, you do have to find out the reason why. But if you want more information on that, look at that clarification. In our member guest events, the partners love to stand back there and watch and get the line for the next shot. And this new subsection precludes that. So just for your information. Okay, again, a little disclaimer, those were not all of the changes for 2023. There are many more, and we're going to give you some sources where to find that. Obviously, the USGA website is probably the best source. If you do a lot, I will say, if you do a lot of other forms of stroke play at your club, like Stableford or something like that, Rule 21 does have some changes in how scoring is done that you're going to want to look at. So look at Rule 21. There's other small changes throughout the rules, but I tried to pick the ones that I thought would affect us most as either players or administrators. Matt, do we need to take a little break?
It's 100% up to you, Alice.
Let's see what time we got.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Okay. I can take questions. We can take a little 5-minute break and I can take questions. And then we're going to move on to the rest of the presentation, which probably will go a little bit quicker, but should be, we can spend as much time as we want answering questions and whatnot. Everybody's good. If you need to make a pit stop, you're on your own or get fresh coffee. And otherwise, I will just move ahead. So now we're back to the second part of the presentation, which is, again, kudos to Tom Karpus. He's the one that put this together. All I did was update it for 2023. And we're going to look at a handful of things here. We're going to look at, rules education. How do you learn more, whether it's for yourself, your staff, your members? What kind of materials are available for us to help us in this learning process and also administratively? Course marking. And there's quite a bit of information. We're going to spend a little bit of time on the last part of the presentation, because while it takes some extra work up front, there's certain things like course marking that if your course is properly marked, I tell you, it makes your life a lot easier. Hard card, do we have to have a hard card at the club level? Not technically, no, but the concept of a hard card, we'll talk about that and why that is beneficial to have at your club. Notice to players, and then we'll talk about starting and scoring, which is where a lot of rules infractions can happen. And we want you to be prepared for that and for your events that you're going to either run in 2023 or that you're going to play in yourselves. Okay, let's talk about rules of golf education. At the top of the list are the PGA USGA Rules of Golf workshops. I think Tom just finished teaching one. He might even still be there. I've done one. We're very lucky. I'll take a little aside here. I feel very fortunate that in the Philadelphia section, we have a very strong rules committee because we have, 5 people serving on the national committee, and the national committee is not that big. So, and our fearless leader is Tom Karpus. I think he's been a mentor to all of us. Anyway, and some of us teach at the national level, and you don't have to attend one of these 3.5-day workshops. It's expensive. There's travel involved. If there's one in the area and you're really interested in the rules, I would encourage you to attend one. But the USGA also has some really good virtual online rules workshops, and that's another great way. I know my friend who's the high school golf coach, she's doing that, trying to increase her rules knowledge. Just in general, on the USGA website, you'll find all kinds of materials. They've got videos. I'm not sure. I think the videos that I played in this presentation, I took them right from the deck that we used for the national workshop, but I think they might be, I'm sure they're probably on the USGA website. They've got infographics, things that you can, put up on your bulletin board, that kind of thing. We try to do these section seminars. If, at the club level, if you feel comfortable doing it, you could do a seminar for your members and your staff, that type of thing. Just anything you can do to get the information. For your members and your customers, bulletin board materials are great. I used to put things up both in the men's and ladies' locker room and in the main hallway. I think the major changes for 2023, I think there's a pretty good infographic that the USGA has that you could put on your bulletin board to help your members and customers get up to speed. Websites and social media. I'm not a big social media person, but I do have this one website that I'm going to show you here in a second that I think is very good if you're trying to learn the rules in a more, in-depth fashion. Generalarea.org is another one, but the last time I was on that, which has been a while ago, it hadn't been updated. That was our go-to one before, but let me just show you real quick this rovingofficial.com. They start with a little disclaimer telling you that, they have no affiliation with the USGA or the RNA, and that's fine. But if you want to get more information for yourself, or if you have a member or a staff person that says, hey, I want to get really into the rules, maybe I want to take the exam and try to get, certified. This is a great resource. There's all kinds of great quizzes on the USGA website, and you can access them through the USGA app. But this website I find is really, there's a lot. You kind of have to wade your way through. But if you go over here to these little arrows, like this more arrow, he has all this stuff, either a link to it or has it summarized. And then right down here at the bottom, this 2023 Rules of Golf Review, here's a much more in-depth look at the changes than what I just gave you. And then he has a little quiz at the bottom. So I found this to be a great site that I recommend to people. Over here under the review side, there's a study guide, exam tips, that kind of thing. So just a nice website to be aware of. All right, what kind of materials do you need to have? Well, you want to have your books. At least I do. I love hard copy books. I got my official guide and my rules of golf. But I recommend everybody, I told all the kids on the high school team, download that USGA app. You want to have that, in your phone, in your bag. They're no longer doing the player's guide for 2023, the smaller, little pocket-sized player's guide. They are not publishing that because all the rules now can be accessed in an app. They do still publish, obviously, the official guide and the rules book. But get that app. If you haven't done it or haven't used it, or if you've got juniors that are going to use it, when you do go on the first time, it's free and they update it constantly. So it's always the latest. These books get a little bit outdated pretty quickly, but the app is always being updated. And you want to go down when you first download it. You want to go down to the bottom. There's like a little ellipse of 3 little dots down at the right, because the default setting is kind of the basic rules. You want to go down there and click on that. And I think you have to hit a button to get to settings. But anyway, you want to select the expert mode, because that gives you not only the rules, it gives you all the clarifications and the committee procedures and everything right there, in your hand, so to speak. So I always carry my hard copy with me, and I love reading out of the hard copy more than I like reading out of the app. The app is a great way to study, though, as is the USGA website with the digital version of the rules, because when you come across a word that's highlighted or italicized like a definition, you can just click on it and it takes you right to the definition, and you can cross-reference a lot easier for study. Speaking of the official guide, the committee procedures in the back and the model local rules are going to be your best friend. When you're running events at your club, when you're trying to put together local rules for your facility, boy, there's so much good information back there, and you can get guidance on, when to use certain model local rules, when to use a drop zone, whatever it might be. There's a lot of guidance on, how to mark a course for regular play, tournament play. But those model local rules, they write it for you. The verbiage is all there. It's kind of fill in the blanks, and it's going to make your job as an administrator much, much easier. The clarifications are now, everything in the back of the official guide is called a clarification, and the USGA is still going to publish that quarterly paper that shows, any updates, any clarifications. They've already had one, and it included, I tried to show it. It has the 2-year grace period for the self-standing putter. That was one of the first clarifications that came out. The next clarifications will be updated, I think, first part of April. And it's just good to have in your shop. Where did I put it? Did I throw it on the floor? Anyway, I start, I try to look it up. Sometimes I think with the rules changes, we won't have as many clarifications as we did after that major revision in 2019. However, just keep them in a binder. I clip them together and I keep them folded up in my rules bag, just so I can remind myself of what clarifications have come out on that quarterly basis. And it's good to have that reference right there in a binder for your staff to look at behind the counter. You can get information on green reading materials. I'm not going to go into that. If you are running some higher level events at your course, and if you use green maps at your course, you might want to get the little clear plastic grid that the USG, I think they send it to member clubs, and for individuals, you can buy one from them for a couple bucks, just to check, players to make sure that their green reading materials are meet the requirements. That's all available. Equipment rules, right there could be in your app or on the USGA website. You can download the equipment rules. You can print it out if you want. I just tend to read them as I need them and try to educate myself. But you have access to all the equipment rules. The rules of amateur status are in the app and on the website for the USGA, and the rules of handicapping. I had a member text me the other day with a handicapping rule, and I have not run events at my club for a couple of years. I know the handicap rules had changed. So I went there in my app and looked it up and sent her the answer. So very helpful to have. You can get hard copies of those things. I think for the handicapping, I would want to definitely have a hard copy of that behind the counter, and I'd probably want the equipment rules behind the counter too. Okay, moving on to golf course marking. This sounds like such a, obvious thing, but I can't begin to tell you, and this is true at the tour level too, having a properly marked golf course makes the committee's job so much easier. You can't even begin to imagine the number of things that can happen if you don't have the course properly marked. And so having it clearly marked and defined is going to make your job as the committee in charge at your facility much easier. And I would always start off by coordinating with the superintendent. At many facilities, the superintendent, somebody on his staff his or her staff might mark the course, but you want to be involved in that process. And you for your own knowledge, number one, and because you might bring a perspective and a rules knowledge to the situation that the superintendent's staff member doesn't have. So really start out by coordinating with the superintendent. Make sure he's got the supplies, he or she has the supplies on hand that you need. The paint colors definitely have red, yellow, and white. If you don't have any yellow penalty areas, you can skip the yellow. Green is a must because we all make mistakes and put the line down in the wrong place, or maybe we want to get rid of a line that was being used for another event. Maybe there's been an outside junior event or something, then you don't want that line where they have it. So, but even as a professional, rules official on the tour, I've had to use green paint and erase some of my mistakes. And blue is probably not necessary, although it comes in handy if you're doing, certain things, no play zones, things like that. You might want to paint something a little bit differently, but definitely red, yellow, white. I've only ever used a single shot paint gun. I've always put double lines down depending on the length of the event. But I think they do make double paint guns, and Tom isn't here to weigh in on that, but I think there is such a thing. Make sure you have plenty of stakes. I think for general play, I know at our courses, we just have stakes out. We don't put paint down unless it's a big event like a member guest or a club championship, because that really, number one, defines it very clearly. But for general play, you're probably going to just have stakes, but make sure you have enough of them and that they're in the right location. And you can coordinate that with the superintendent. And I think when it says mallet and work gloves, yes, I think pros should be out there. I think maybe you're not marking it every time, but even if your superintendent staff is doing it for every young professional, and especially if you're trying to be a player or you want to administer golf tournaments at some point, knowing how to mark a golf course is one of our, I think, knowledge bases that we should have. And you really can't understand the nuances of it until you do it. You get out there with your old tennis shoes on and your paint gun, and you start putting paint on the ground, and you come to look at a golf course in a different way, because now you're looking at it from both a player perspective and a rules official perspective, and how you mark it. You want to benefit the player as much as you can, but you also want to make the job easier for the rules official. And you really don't learn that other than by doing it. It doesn't mean that you or your staff have to mark the course every time, but if you have young pros on your staff, it wouldn't be bad for them to have that skill set in their resume.
Hey, Alice.
Yes.
Brian Schulte raised his hand. Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, Alice.
Hey, Brian.
Thanks again for taking the time today to do this for everybody. Just wanted to comment on the double paint guns. The section does use double paint guns. We actually have purchased a few from Parade.
Okay.
They're a big help for a lot of our clubs in the area if you're looking to not paint as often. Obviously, you're going to use double the paint, but they certainly help us, especially for those yellow lines, because they're a little bit less faint than those red lines out there. So if anyone wants to reach out to me about more of those paint guns, just let me know.
Boy, that's great. Thanks, Brian. And boy, I encourage everybody, if you've ever painted a golf course and you have an event that's multi-days, and it's like, oh, I've got to put a double line down so it'll last through the upcoming rainstorm or whatever. I would have loved to have had double paint guns when I was working on the tour, and even at our club. I'll have to mention that to Clem, but that's great information, and thank you for that. Really does make the workload lighter. It makes the lines last longer, especially for multi-day events. Thank you. Mallet work gloves, if you're pounding steaks, that's, I always carry old leather work gloves with me. And even as a rules official, sometimes you have to reset stakes on a course that have been knocked down. And my little tender pinkies, they need a little protection. So I do carry some old leather work gloves in my rules kit. You want to go out and you want to review the boundaries. And you can do this with your superintendent. You can do it if you've got a golf committee or whatever, but it's mainly, it's going to be up to you and the superintendent to review boundaries and but what fence lines are inbounds, out of bounds, which ones are maybe a decorative fence as part of the golf course. How are you going to mark the boundaries that are unclear? It's one thing if you're surrounded by a fence, it's like, yep, the fence is the boundary, but there's always wide open spaces. And how are you going to define those? And what do you need to define those? And stakes would be the common thing. And just make sure you have enough of them. I think it's okay to get away with fewer stakes for general play, because you can kind of let people figure it out for themselves. But if you have any kind of an event that counts and has, prize money, pro shop credit or whatever, you'll make life a lot easier by having those stakes close enough, those boundary stakes close enough that you can eyeball it from stake to stake. And if it's a higher level event, that can run a string if you have to. So just go over those with your super and see how you want to treat those. You're going to look at all your penalty areas. I know we've had the discussion, should we make everything red, and there's some holes that just play better with a yellow penalty area just because that's the way the architect designed it. I personally would never criticize anybody for going with all red. It could make everyone's life easier, but golf course design, I think, dictates that we still have yellow penalty areas. And I don't think drop zones in general are needed, although we have a hole on our Nemours course that it's a little par 3 uphill and it carries over a pond, and our older ladies and some of our beginners, they just can't get over that pond. So we do put a little drop zone. The superintendent kind of keeps it up and puts it off to the side where they at least, they're dropping closer to the hole and they're not negotiating the penalty area, but we just want them to play and enjoy golf. So you might have a drop zone that you use on a regular basis, but for the most part, drop zones are going to be for your member guest or your club championship, that kind of thing. And you want to see, hey, where do we need them? And who's going to put them down? No play zones. I really do talk to your superintendent about this. They may have just put in a nice landscaped area and they don't want people tromping around in there, trying to hit shots out of their flower bed. So review the possible no play zones that you might want to have. And again, could be turf nurseries. The landscaped areas and flower beds are what we typically make no play zones at our club. And now we're going to, model local rules to consider. This is something you want to do. You can do it with the superintendent, you can do it with your staff, with other knowledgeable players, or you can just use some of the examples that we're going to give you. But you do want to, when you're out there marking the course, what model local rules might we need to help make this fair for everybody? This is a list, not a complete list. These are just some of the more common ones that are used both at our section level, at some of the different clubs, at the national level on some of these. And you can find these all in the back of the book. They're all back there in the committee procedures under the model local rules section. And it can be very helpful. For instance, we have a boundary, we have a fence stone with a stacked stone on our one course. There's a little stacked stone wall, and it does help separate out, what goes into the maintenance area. And we have not put this rule in place. We don't tend to play too many tournaments over there. But if you have a little stacked stone wall and it's real irregular on the surface on the side that's, the golf course side, you can have a model local rule that says in A2, you can clarify, okay, is the wall the boundary marker, and the ball could be out of bounds when it's beyond the wall instead of getting stuck in the little nooks and crannies of the wall. So that's a situation where you might use that one. Internal out of bounds. There is no shame, and there's great need sometimes for internal out of bounds. We have one on each of our 2 courses. We do have internal out of bounds on one hole on each course. And from a safety standpoint, it's just absolutely crucial. And don't think it's I'm not playing real golf with internal out of bounds. If any of your members or customers question that, hey, Carrie Haig, we had an internal out of bounds at the KPMG last year at Congressional, and it was absolutely necessary because it was very advantageous for players to play up this other fairway potentially and have an easier shot into the green. So from a safety standpoint, and just so as not to disrupt play on another hole, internal out of bounds, that A4 can be very helpful to you. A5 is just for if you have a public road that runs through your course and you want to make sure players know that if your ball crosses the road, even though it ends up on another part of the course, it is still out of bounds. I don't know how many of our clubs use that rule. B2 gets used quite a bit. With the new penalty area relief rule in 2019, red penalty areas no longer had the option of going to the opposite side unless put into place by this model local rule. And there's good guidance in the back of the guide for when you should use this model local rule, when it's just impractical or really unfair to the player to not be able to come to the opposite side of a red penalty area. But the default does not include that opposite side relief, so you have to put it in using this model local rule. Dropping zones, if you're going to use dropping zones, there's great language in here. Again, these things set up the language for you. It's kind of like, fill in the blank, and you can say what hole and where is it, and great thing to have as far as the verbiage for having dropping zones for your events. Or if you have a local rule that's in place all the time, you can also use that. Preferred lies, that's my member's favorite local rule is preferred lies, but there are times, hopefully these are seasonal, these next two, but if you're going to play preferred lies, I encourage you to use the language that's in model local rule E3. Same thing for relief from aeration holes. That's a good one. I think that's on the hard card, or I don't know if it's on our section hard card year round or on the tour hard card, but that's a common one. We don't want players taking relief out of every little nook and cranny, but aerations happen. It's really important to the health of our golf courses, and we want to give players relief out of that, especially in a tournament situation. When players are playing on their own, they're going to take their own relief, but in a tournament situation, you want them to have relief for the lie of the ball from that aeration hole. F5, this is our typical thing, would be a sprinkler head. It's an immovable obstruction close to the green. I know we have some of those on our course, and there are a couple variations of F5. I think F5.2 is the one that says both the ball and the obstruction have to be in a closely mown area. And the obstruction can be, the sprinkler head could be on the putting green, and if it interferes with the player's line of play for a ball that's off the putting green, as long as both the obstruction and the obstructions within 2 club lengths of the green and the ball's within 2 club lengths of the obstruction, you can get relief. So that's appropriate on many of the courses in our area. Sod seams, again, seams of cut turf, good local rule. If you've had some sodded areas, some repair on your course and you're running an event, this is a good model local rule to know and put in on the sheet, on the notice for the players, so they can get relief from that. G9 came up earlier in the presentation, with the damage rule now. Any club that's damaged can be replaced. And as you saw in the video, even if it's just a scrape from hitting a ball off a cart path, without model local rule G9 in place, the player could stop and replace that club at the turn or something. So G9 just really restricts the replacement. It has to be broken or significantly damaged. And that rules out a club that's just maybe cracked, scraped, that kind of thing. So reserved for higher level events, definitely. And that is on it's notable, and it's on our section hard card. The new model local rule that we talked about, L1, I think this is going to go on our section hard card. We've had a little bit of discussion about this. It's definitely going to be on I printed out the LPGA's hard card for 2023. It's on there. I think most major organizations are going to have this about reducing that DQ penalty to 2 strokes if it's missing, if the scorecard's missing a signature, and that'll be on our section hard card as well, I'm pretty sure. So good one to have at the club level, because think of how many times, players are turning their scorecard in. We're going to talk about scoring in a minute and try and make sure the players know where to turn their scorecards in. But, sometimes you might just have a box where the players drop a card in, or, it's very easy to have this mistake happen. And if the card is filled out properly and the score is valid, otherwise, missing a signature is a pretty harsh thing to get DQ'd over. Now, if they sign for a score or they return a score lower than they've made, that's different. That's not what L1 is talking about. This is strictly to do with having those 2 signatures on the card, and it would be a good one to put in at the club level, in my opinion. All right, now we're going to look at, quote, hard card, which really is just the local rules you're going to have in place all the time at your facility. And then we're going to talk about notice to players, which are for more specific things for a specific event. So, the hard card, whether it's at the section level or on the tours, very common document. It's called a hard card because they usually, for the organizations, they print it out on card stock, and it's a little more durable than having a sheet of paper, but it's the same thing. So if you have certain local rules at your club that are going to be in place all the time, for regular member play, for events, for whatever, have that sheet. And it's in essence, it's your hard card, and you're going to post that, maybe you have a starter shack. We have little bulletin boards at our starter shack. You can post that. We put the ones, the stuff that we think is most important that can fit, we put on the back of the scorecard. When you go play a new course, you look on the back of the card. If you're just playing, I always look at the back to see if they have any local rules. And so the things that are going to be in effect all the time, you're going to put that on your hard card. And that's it. That's always in effect. The notice to players that we'll look at next can overrule the hard card for a specific competition. So when you think hard card, think of this as the local rules you're going to put on the back of your scorecard for every player that plays your course. Okay. If you want to try to create something like this for your club, and I think it's a great idea, it's a little bit of work up front, but it's going to save you and your staff time and going forward. You can use our section template and just kind of look and get a feel. And that's what I do. I look and I get a feel for what other organizations are doing. I always get the hard card at any event I officiate it, not just for when I'm officiating the event, but I also want to look at it like, oh, is this how we should write up stuff at our club? Can I pick up something here that I would use at my home course? If you're competing at all in the section, this next bullet point, definitely be familiar with the section hard card. It is part of the rules that are being applied to every event that you play at the section level. Just a little encouragement, make it look good. If you're going to the trouble to put this piece of paper, this document together, put your logo on it, use the wording that's back there in the model local rules. That's what it's there for. I mean, they write it out for us, so it sounds very official and it's very accurate with how the rules of golf are applied. And just, make it look good. I used to laminate the sheet that I would put in that outside bulletin board. Even though the bulletin board had a glass cover, I knew it was going to get weathered, and but I wanted it to look good. And the last point, and we mentioned notice to players already, this hard card, these local rules that are in effect all the time, is going to work hand in hand with the notice to players. We're going to look at that next. So the notice to players is specific. It's a specific document for that particular event, and it'll have the golf course you're going to play, the name of the event, the date, okay, and then anything specific in addition to or to overrule the stuff that was on the hard card is going to go on this notice. And because maybe there's some kind of damage that's happened recently, you want to put that on the notice to players. You always want to have the format. What tees are you going to play? Is a handicap event, scratch event? If it's a handicap event, what's the handicap allowance? A lot of this can be done in the we have the scoring software, Golf Genius and whatnot, and it can be put on the landing page. And I think most facilities do put the information in to some degree, but the more detail you can give it, the better. A big one for me is how to break ties. Are you going to play off? Are you going to match cards? It makes players very unhappy when they're not sure, they come in and they're tied and they think they're going to go play off. And it's like, no, there's no playoff for this event. We're going to match cards. So having that information on the notice to the players ahead of time is going to save you some headaches. And also then once it's set up, you can have it either a template that you start with, but then as you run events throughout the course of the year, you'll have that as your template for the following year. As far as defining the scoring area for, even at our club level events, our smaller events, I always try to put somewhere on the notice, like, where are you supposed to turn in your scorecard? Maybe we're doing scoring, in the grill, and we've got a TV up, and the person that's taking the scorecards there. Usually we would have just turn into the, golf shop, turn into the counter. Try to give on your notice a specific place that you want those players to turn that card in. It's going to save a lot of headaches trying to track down cards that are misplaced. Ideally, they're going to turn it into a location that has a person sitting there. And then that person, if it's your staff, you're going to train them to say, hey, you got 2 signatures? Is there a score in every box? kind of help, some of those scoring issues. So it doesn't have to be for big events. Yeah, we've got a tent, we've got it roped, we've got it defined with paint. It's a very defined area. But even at the club level, letting your players know where they're expected to turn the scorecard in save you a lot of headaches. Okay. Starting and scoring, lots of rules, not snafus, penalty situations can happen because of starting and scoring. We'll start with scoring. You really want to make sure you train your staff on scoring procedures. And this could be as simple as, okay, when they start turning their cards in, before they walk away, say, hey, you got let me check for 2 signatures. Is there a score in every box? That kind of thing. Just those couple little checks can save a really unpleasant situation of having to disqualify somebody. Or again, with the model local rule in place, L1, we might just have to add 2 strokes, but still, that's not any fun to tell a player that, hey, you're in a penalty situation because of this. So the person doing the scoring or that's accepting the scorecards can avoid a lot of that. It is nice to be able to define both the starting area and the scoring area. In bigger events, we do it with ropes and stakes. It's very well defined, and you better be inside that starting area when it's your time, and you better not leave that scoring area until you've ensured that your card is correct. And we can't always do that for our club events. That's a little bit impractical, but you can, just remind people, like, you've got to be on your starting tee when it's time for you to start. And depending on the level of your event and how tight you want to run that, you might have it somewhat defined. The junior tournaments, if you end up hosting an AJGA tournament or something, they will define those starting and scoring areas. They might not have ropes anywhere else, but they will define those 2 areas. How you stage your starting area, it might, like for us, it's in the middle of kind of things. It's not right next to the first tee or the 10th tee, but you stage it in a place, in a way that looks professional. I think it's nice to have a table with a nice tablecloth with a club logo on it, and where players can check in, pick up their scorecard, get some tees if they need it, maybe a ball repair tool, they get pencils, whatever. If it looks nice, it just elevates it. It's not a lot of effort, and it can really elevate the impression of your tent. We always used to talk about it's all about the presentation. We usually said that when we were out marking the golf course, with the second coating of paint and bad weather. But having that first impression presentation as players start playing your event, it adds a level of professionalism, and they automatically think, oh, this is a well-run event, whether it is or not. At least you get off with a good start. And then just having the right supplies, having a starter's box that has everything in it. Again, a small investment, but you can find ways to do that with plastic bins, if you will. And you need something that's going to keep things dry. If it's a starter's table, scoring, you can usually do that indoors if you have to, but just keep things dry. Make sure you have the appropriate supplies, plenty of pencils. They go through a lot of pencils. They go through a lot of teas. Just be well stocked. A little bit of hard candy that goes a long way too sometimes. Refreshments, that usually, you can have snacks at the starting table or the starting area, but really if they come into a scoring area, defined scoring area. Now, if they're coming into the grill, they can buy their own refreshments. But if maybe, you have a real big tournament and a scoring area has been designated, or a starting area, having those refreshments, those snacks and beverages is a nice touch if your budget can afford it. Okay, that's all I have for the presentation, and that's the end of the presentation. So I'm going to ask everybody, are you rules ready for 23? And if not, what can we do to help you?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions, comments for Alice. Going once, going twice.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. I know rules can be a very dry subject, but it's something as professionals that we really have to have at least a decent understanding and a basic grasp. And if you're a player, boy, it can really help you. I mean, we get so spoiled as players. We go to events and we've got our section staff and they run things. And if we need have a rules question, we can ask them and they're going to answer it. When I played on tour, as a tour player, I mean, even if you thought you knew the rule, you called for an official because it could cost you so much money if you were wrong. And we had that luxury. And it wasn't until I had an interest in the rules, but it wasn't until later in my playing career that I became very interested. And I wish I had done that at the start of my career. I can remember high school and college coaches trying to get us interested in the rules to help us with our play. And it's like, I don't, so important skill to have. Certain base level of knowledge is important. If you really want to be a rules nerd, there's a lot out there there's a big rabbit hole to go down, but that's not necessary for the club pro, in my opinion. But you do want to have a pretty good grasp. You are the committee, sometimes the committee of one at your facility, and the rules questions will come to you, but you always have your section rules committee as a resource to call us or text us or shoot us a note, and we'll try to help you answer the questions that come up.
Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, thanks everybody for attending. And please keep an eye on your emails. We're working with the Rules Committee to set a date for an in-person seminar. And we hope to have that date picked out today or tomorrow, with information coming out sometime next week. So, Alice, you have any last comments?
No, not really. I just wish everybody a good 2023 season. And I think these new rules changes, again, a lot of it's familiar. It incorporates information from clarifications that came about after the 2019 code came out. And just wish everybody well, and call us with any questions, contact us. We're here to help. Good weather ahead, and have a great season. Thanks for attending. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Great job, Alice.